Hello and welcome to another edition of the Leader Campus Voices. I'm Mel Wildermuth, and my interview today is with Karen Keller. Karen, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed today. She's creator of the Keller Influence Indicators, influence expert, influence leadership, a speaker, and an author. So you have quite a few things up there. And the author is what influence? What's the tagline to it? Or
it's influence. What's the missing piece? And
okay.
Mel, it's a pleasure to join you today.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it. So let's start out with the first question. And
Mm-hmm.
how does authentic leadership fit into your ideas of leadership?
Well, I think that when you look at the word authentic, being authentic, authenticity, that is something that's very attractive, I should say, to people. As a leader, especially, you want to be attractive to people because it connects with their human nature. When people are sensing intuitively or instinctively, whatever the case, when they're sensing that you're real, that's when they're going to be paying attention. They're going to be listening. They're going to feel free to be themselves in return, which is equally as important. They're going to ask those questions. They're going to make the mistakes. They're going to own up to their failures. They're going to celebrate the successes. And I think that all comes about when I would even take it to be a little bit of a larger thing and express it as an authentic environment where people really are allowed to be who they are. See, one of the things that, based on my research and with the instrument and we've got a huge database, 92 countries are represented in our database, several thousands of people. And what we're looking at and what we're finding is that we're noticing that there's a difference between, people have become, there's a difference between who you've become and who you are. And what we're finding is that who you've become is getting in the way of who you are.
Huh.
And so when we become something other than that of which we are and meant to be, whether it's personality or our own potential, an attitude, anything like that, when we're something else than what we really are, that's the antithesis of authenticity. And people pick up on that. They may not be able to define it. They may not be able to find the words or speak to it, but they know it's there. And that's when the heart overrules the head, because then is when we listen to people, or then is when we challenge people, then is when we don't trust people, we don't find them trustworthy. And if we don't find them trustworthy, we don't necessarily find them likable.
So do you think then, to some extent, that people have an idea of what leadership should be, and they try to fit themselves within that kind of mold, and therefore lose that idea of authenticity?
I think there's some truth to that. I think that we have evidence of that. We can look back in history, we can look at current, and we don't just need to look at only political arena.
Mm-hmm.
We can look in the research arena, we can look in the celebrity, the music arena, we can look in the sports arena, we can look at all these different arenas where I think what you just said shows up. And the evidence that we have of it is, first of all, our own reaction to it. Secondly, is when people really realize that they've become somebody other than who they are, they own up to it. They talk about it. They say, really, that person that I was for those years, that wasn't my true self. And I've started on a journey to find out who I truly am. And what I think people are discovering is that they are happier, they're more satisfied, they have better relationships, and it makes them a better leader. They look at people differently when they really are being authentic.
Yeah. My wife runs the Christina Wildermuth is a Ph.D., well, EDD, and you're a Ph.D., so maybe I should call you Dr. Keller. But
That's Karen's fine.
Okay, thanks, Karen. I think I try not to be so formal, but
no need to be. Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate it. So, one of the things that's interesting about what Chris talks about sometimes in her classes is psychological safety. How does psychological safety play into what you talk about on your LinkedIn page, freedom?
I think it has a lot to do with it, and that's that's a lot. The whole term about psychological safety, you can get a very formalized, very structured definition of it, or you can, and that would be accurate, but you can also take it into what layman's terms would be, and it's simply just how safe do I feel with another person. And that safety is measured in part when you in part about my relationship to that person, even if I don't know that person. What I'm picking up on, the cues, the nonverbal, of course, and the words and their tone and all these things of communication. But when I think about psychological safety and authenticity, I look at it as to how I look at it with our own model and what we do. We work with organizations to form like a partnership. And that means a partnership between the organization and the people that work within that organization. And that the strength of that partnership is based on how people perform. Not just the people in the organization, but the organization as a whole. So you have different levels within an organization because there's different responsibilities and roles, and there has to be. But when we can develop a partnership now based on performance, and that performance, when you want to take a look at having performance, whether it's high productivity and it's prosperity and profits and all that stuff, but the key piece that dictates what that performance is going to be like is the impact we have on each other. Because at the end of the day, we are judged on the impact that we have on others. And so my question was, when I developed the assessment, was what is it that determines the impact that we do have on each other? And in our research over the last several years, we have found that there are traits that are common, not only common, but people who are very influential that have in abundance. And it's the 7 traits of the confidence. They're committed, courage, passion, empowering, trustworthiness, and likability. And so then I wrote the instrument to measure that, because I figured out that people, when we want to go in search of who we are, and this is what comes out of all of this is just kind of, we go from the partnership and we look at performance, we look at impact, we look at traits. It's just kind of like we're spiraling it down. All those 7 traits go right back and have a direct impact on the partnership that we want to have between the organization, between the people that are inside that organization. And so when we look at that, we look at who people really are, and we help them return to who they are. We help them be more confident, more likable, more trustworthy. And so before, though, we can do that, it occurred to me, well, how do we know how trustworthy? Because everybody thinks we're trustworthy. I mean, I think I'm really trustworthy. I think I'm really likable. But gosh, where do I fit in the scheme of things?
Yeah.
I mean, I have all these self-help books, and they're great and wonderful. I've used so much of them, but it never said much about me. And so that's where the assessment comes in, because before I can help an organization and work within the people, I need to know the benchmark.
Okay.
Any statistician will tell you that. Any research will say we need to have a benchmark, and that's what this assessment does. That you spoke of when you introduced me. But I think that all comes back to the whole thing about being authentic, and when people are authentic, because human nature. There were 2 things when I wrote the book. There were 2 pillars that really kind of guided my thought process on this. One of them was human nature, which is kind of like an umbrella over psychological safety. So human nature, and the other one was common sense.
Okay.
And it makes sense. All these traits are common among every single person on this planet. Now the difference is how they've been allowed to be nurtured, or how they've chosen to nurture their confidence, to grow their passion, that type of stuff. And it also depends on how they're leveraging it. So let's say I work with an executive in a company, and her confidence is at a 78. I can work with her right there and say, okay, you have some potential here that you are leaving on the table, basically. So let's get to work and grow your confidence. And then once she grows her confidence, then the question becomes, or if we have somebody that comes in and their benchmark is like a 94, that's pretty high. That's really high. Then my question to them is, how are you using your confidence? And this is what's really interesting, Mel. I've had hundreds of conversations with people because of our research and because of my own need to understand. People are so surprised that they have all this confidence, for example, and they're not using it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't occur to them to think about confidence is really a strength in this conversation, and how should I be using it? How should I show up? So that's some of the things that we found.
Early on the Leader Campus, we had a question about how much fear plays into things. So how much does fear play into this aspect of lack of confidence?
Oh, I think that when we fear things, the first thing that we fear is our own self, because we have these we place on ourselves, or we've adopted from somebody else that's placed on to us, limitations. And so it becomes kind of our belief system that, well, I could never do that, or I could never be that, or I could never approach or take a risk. And so I think fear becomes very much a strong player in a lot of things. But what we found in our research, when we looked at people, the people that have a high influence scores, they manage risk. Now, it can be a calculated risk. It depends on what it is. But the point of it is that not only do they take the risk, but they're able to manage it, which lends itself to the earlier comment on psychological safety. So if I have a high confidence, if I empower people around me, and I'm able to let go, that means I can handle and manage risk. So I'm prepared for it. And so then that means I can step out and I can not only recognize opportunities, I can make opportunities appear and create them, not only for myself, but for other people. And that's what makes a person influential. See, one of the things we learned, there's a difference between having influence and being influential. Being influential is a higher order of having influence. You think about influence that, based on title, or, your doctor has influence, or a religious person has influence. Your parent has influence. That's because of, it's because of position or authority or whatever. Rich people have influence because they have money and stuff. But I'm talking about people who possess in abundance these 7 traits. Think of Gandhi, think of Christ, think of Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King Jr. They were not rich people. They spoke differently. They were extremely authentic. And look at how influential they were beyond their little small environment, that they moved people. But it was really about who they were. And so that's what I am measuring, is what is a person's potential to be influential. And it's basically like when you relate this to leadership, we think of leadership and we think of in like business, in a company, in an organization, whatever it would be. Well, one of the most important things in business is predictability, the ability to predict. And that's what we can do. We can find a company's sweet spots. We can also identify their trouble spots. And then we can go to work and we can say, this is the thing that's holding this person back. Or this is the thing that this person has in huge abundance, but they're not using it. Let's teach them how to use it, and they're off and running. So
now you're using traits. You're using traits in certain aspects when you talk about what you look at. Personality traits. What are the personality traits of a person? We use the 5-factor model, Chris and I, when we do training. What personality traits may give some people an advantage to be influential?
Well, the traits that we measure are not personality traits.
Okay.
They're not traits. We've really discovered a crack in the armor, if you will, or a niche of looking at a person through looking at another dimension of a person through these lens. And it's that whole dimension around their influence potential. And so it's not about personality or skill assessment or interest or competencies. It's not about emotional intelligence. It's about these types of traits. And one of the things is that, like I said a little bit ago, every person on this planet has all 7 of these traits.
Mm.
It's like a continuum. How well are they developed and how do they express them? Not every person has the same personality type or personality preferences or tendencies. Personality isn't necessarily a choice. When we look at personality assessments, it's along the lines of understanding ourselves better and how we interact with our environment. When I looked at these 7 traits that aren't personality traits, they're all about choices to use what we have innately. Every person has this. So as far as to speak to personality qualities or characteristics, that's a huge discussion. I'd have to take a look at. I would say that, I don't know. Do you think extroverts are more likable than introverts? I don't know. I mean, I haven't done that type of research. I'm just really staying focused on what makes people influential.
Well, it seems to me, from what we've looked at, is that there is a leg up for most extroverts because of the ability to communicate well in an interview. Those of us that are more introverted have a tendency to be more quiet, and therefore people think that we're either ignorant or or don't have much to say, and therefore
I do know. I can tell you that in a group, one of the most powerful people is the silent person in a group. When you look at group dynamic theory.
Well, that makes me feel good.
There you go. See, you didn't know you had all this power, and you do.
I didn't know. I'm going to have to sway some of that around the house.
Yeah, there you go. Well, is your wife an introvert or an extrovert?
No, she is completely an extrovert.
Oh, she is.
She's
sure.
Yeah, we've always talked about that. I am the one that'll go do a training program, and then when I come back to the hotel, I crash. I can't go out. Yeah. She's the kind that somebody will say, "Can you go out for a drink?" And oh yeah, we'll go out for a drink. And she goes. So everybody likes her better than me because I don't. Well, anyway, I shouldn't be talking about myself this much. You're bringing this out of me, Karen.
It's all very interesting because I think you're being authentic, and I think everybody that's going to be watching or listening to this, we can all relate to this.
Another thing. What's interesting also to me is there's a question now on the campus also, and since you do have, what's your Ph.D. in, by the way, Karen?
Clinical psychology.
Okay, there you go.
And so I had a really good handle on human nature and have studied it for years.
Yeah.
But yes.
Let's run into then what's recently happening. I don't want to get too political about it, but what's interesting is, do you think, or how do you think leaders should approach this idea of involvement in issues? I don't want to even say political issues, of issues. Currently we have the NRA and people are dropping out of giving them their own special card and flight, free flight, discount flights. Yeah. So how should a leader approach that type of situation, or should they do that at all?
Well, when you talk about a leader, I think that a leader listens to all perspectives. And and I think that it's important that the whole concept about authenticity for me, involves freedom. I really support that. We're very fortunate. I feel blessed to live in the country that we do, where we have that freedom of expression and thought and artistic, design. But I think that we do pay attention. When I say we, I think leaders need to pay attention to certain climate, whether it's an economic climate, whether it's a political climate, whether it is, resource climate, when you're looking at evaluating resources. And I think leaders are really positioned to look at the big picture, because when I think about here's kind of where my head is. I'm just going to kind of randomly speak, if you don't mind.
No, that's
I
fine.
just think,
It's fine.
in my experience and what I work with companies and that in leadership in the C-suite mainly, is to be transformational, to help people transform, to help ideas. And I don't just mean that you control. Sometimes people think, well, transforming means you're going to mold somebody. That's not what that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's about opening the door for a transforming of ideas, of opinions, and things like this. Because I think that the authentic or the influential leader, what he or she does, they tend to see things that a lot of people don't see. They say things that a lot of people don't say. They believe things that a lot of people don't believe. And I think that also, that all because I've seen that, I've experienced that, and I think that that's a beautiful part of being an influential leader. Then I think then they take actions that a lot of other people don't. And sometimes that may mean being unpopular with a decision. It may mean introducing a whole new line of thought or perspective. And sometimes people need to see that, and it's tough being a leader. It's very difficult. But I do believe that every person is the leader, no matter if they answer the phone and open the door at, a multi-billion-dollar company, or if they're the chairman of the board. Everybody is a leader and everybody matters.
Mm-hmm. So one last question, I think, because
Mm-hmm.
we're running low on time.
Sure.
How far should influence go, you think? You were just talking about everybody can have influence. How far should influence go, especially when you're talking about economics or you're talking about positions like the Me Too movement? And how far should that influence go by a business leader or by a political leader or by anyone? I mean, I would imagine political leaders should have more influence because we're trying to get into an area of law, but how much influence should business have in that kind of situation?
Well, I think that it goes back to, first of all, I think that not everybody has influence, but everybody can be influential.
Okay.
Because we really differentiate between those two things. And this is the first time, it's a very new concept. I'm really the new kid on the block talking to some major companies about what's happening in their company from this perspective, and how they engage. But I think that it goes back to that partnership.
Okay.
We all live on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
We have such a global stage in front of us. And what we do on that stage, we can see a war right in our living rooms. We can, it's almost like spies. A celebrity goes out and there's pictures and everything of them doing things, and you're left to your own devices to assume. That's one of the things I think I would say, is that we do have a partnership. I think that, the politics and the rules that we make as we govern ourselves as a society, and I think looking at all levels of society is very important. But I think that there is a global responsibility that we have as individuals. Now, that being said, there needs to be some type of a partnership where business and political and religious and philosophical means that we can come together and figure out what is best. What do we have? What's available to us to be using? When you look at technology and how fast it's growing, you talk about fear, and I think that is the advancement and the advances in the technology creates fear in the people that need to use it. And so they're getting lost. They're falling behind. And so I think that this is one of the things that we need to be looking at. Now, my piece in that is not working with the technology, but it's working with the people who work with the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Because we won't be falling behind if we're confident and if we're courageous and if we're really passionate about it. But I do believe that there needs to be a certain level of partnership because we're very close to each other on this planet,
I hit the recording button and stopped the recording. I hope this is not. That was not a good place to do it. No, it looks like we're okay. At
Okay.
least I hope so. I must have done it fast enough that I could stop. That'll I can't edit that out either because I don't edit. So
Hey,
hey,
this is authentic. This is real.
This is
We are
real.
being
This is
real.
this
Yes,
is real.
exactly.
Well, I talk.
This is my office.
I thought this is my office too, and
Yeah.
you know,
And over here is the lake I live on. You know, it's like all this. That's why it's kind of bright over here. I want to share with people. It's really bright over here because I have the blinds down, but we have all windows on this
there
side
you
of my
go.
office.
Okay. Well,
So
I want to say thanks so much
Yes.
for your time. I
Oh, I'm so
appreciate it
glad you
greatly,
had me.
and it's an amazing thing. And you get a chance to plug your book now as kind of a reward for
Oh,
the interview.
yes.
So
Oh,
go
you
ahead
know
and plug
what?
it.
Yes, and this is because you told me to. This is my book. I do have it right here, and it's really about what's the missing piece because, as I talked about a little earlier, we found a crack in the armor, and it is moving quickly. So, if you can find on Amazon everywhere and stuff, but it's about the missing piece, both in our companies and in our organizations.
Well,
So,
thanks so much again, Karen, for
thanks,
your
Mel.
time. I appreciate it greatly, and take care. Maybe we can talk
Okay.
again more time at another time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.